What's happening, guys? Cooper Carter here for G66 and Fractal Audio Systems, and this week's Fractal Friday finds me in a top secret location with these partially finished Axe 3 live rigs for Mr. Benson Boone. And I thought it would be a good time to answer a question that I get a lot. So I suppose many people think the answer is very complicated when it's actually very simple. And the question is this: how do you get a backup Fractal unit to follow in lockstep with a main Fractal unit as you're switching live, so that if you ever need to go to the backup, it's right where you want it to be? I have been known to say that the world is full of Fractal rigs with backup units that have never been used. And if you watch Fractal Friday and you've seen some of my tone tours, you'll know that many of the artists and techs featured in those videos have funny stories about backups or their lack thereof. There are several bands who famously have just never toured with backup Fractal units. There are techs who have great stories about essentially keeping the backups in their work boxes and using them as the world's most expensive, overqualified tuner. But of course, it is best practice to have a backup, if you can, for every piece of gear that you use in a live show, so that if the worst does happen, well, the show can go on. Which leads to the question, how do you get a backup unit to follow a main unit sound for sound during a show? You might be changing presets, changing scenes. You might be turning different effects on and off throughout the show. And if you do need to switch to a backup, you of course want that backup to be on the same sound as the main unit when you switch to it, so that the change is seamless. Now, as always, this is a very quick video covering just one topic, but if you guys want to get the absolute most out of your Fractal Audio Systems unit, whether that is the Axe 3, the FM9, or the FM3, make sure to visit classes.coopercarter.com for my complete Fractal Audio Masterclass series. I am, of course, working on the Axe 3 here, but everything I'm about to go through holds true for the Axe 3, the FM9, the FM3, and the VP4 as well. Many touring acts now across the spectrum, from the biggest stadium acts to the smallest bar bands, are now triggering any number of changes during a show via playback or a playback system. So the same playback system that might be running, let's say, backing tracks, or even in some cases queuing video and lights, will also send out MIDI commands to the main unit, and all of the sounds change without any need for a pedal board. This keeps the stage clean, it keeps the show going. A lot of bands are going this way. There are, of course, still many players who prefer to step through their sounds on a pedal board, like the FC12 or the FC6, or in the case of the FM9, the FM3, and the VP4, the foot switches on the units themselves. And that is obviously a perfectly valid way to run a show in the modern era as well. The methods for getting a backup unit in sync with the main, though, do differ a bit for each of those two scenarios: playback and foot switching control. Let's start with how to set up two units being triggered by a playback system or another form of MIDI control. And this is actually the easiest way to get a backup unit to follow a main, as you'll see. The first thing you need to do is, of course, run a MIDI cable from your playback system into the MIDI input of your A or main unit. Then just run a second MIDI cable from the MIDI through of the A unit to the MIDI in of the B unit. Again, I'm on the Axe 3 here, but if you're on the FM9, the FM3, or the VP4, those units combine the MIDI through and out into a single jack. So you'll be coming out of that on the A unit. And if you're on the VP4, make sure to turn MIDI through on in the Setup MIDI menu. And now the job is very simple. All we need to do is make sure that any MIDI settings you need for control are exactly the same for the B unit as they are for the A unit. I'm using the editor to access the Setup/MIDI remote menu, but these changes can also be made on the unit itself by going to Setup, MIDI remote, and navigating through the various pages there. So first, we're just going to make sure that both units are on the same MIDI channel. In this case, we have them both on channel 1. And then we want to make sure that any MIDI CC numbers that we've assigned are the same in both units. If you're not familiar with MIDI, CC stands for continuous controller or control change. And these values allow us to switch pretty much anything in a Fractal unit via MIDI. So in this case, I have both units set to listen to CC number 34 to select scenes. I'm going to turn delay 1 on and off via CC number 47, and we're going to turn the drive 1 pedal on and off via CC number 49. Now, if this all seems like Greek to you and you want to learn more about setting up a playback session in your DAW to actually send these kind of changes, I've covered that in previous Fractal Fridays, which are linked in the video description. But now that the two units match in their MIDI settings, when a playback system sends a preset change on channel 1 via a PC or program change number, the units both move from preset 0000 to 0001. When playback changes to, let's say, scene 4 in that same preset, both units hear that command on CC number 34 and change to scene 4. Likewise, when playback turns the delay off via CC 47, both units respond. And when playback turns the drive pedal on via CC number 49, the drive pedal comes on in both units. Now remember, we want both units to be exactly the same here, so you don't need to do all of the MIDI work in both the A and B units. Just set up the A unit the way you want it with your CCs and your MIDI channel, and then take a system backup via FractalBot and send that same system backup file into Unit B. Since the two units are twins, no matter what changes the playback or any other MIDI system makes to the A unit, the B unit is always going to be on the same sound if you need to switch over to the backup. Okay, so now let's talk about getting a backup unit to follow a main unit that's being switched by not a playback system, but a Fractal foot controller, whether that's an FC12 or an FC6, or again, in the case of the FM9, the FM3, and the VP4, via the foot switches on the unit itself. Things get a bit more complicated here, but stay with me, it's still very straightforward. In this case, we're just using one MIDI cable, and you want to connect the MIDI out of your A unit to the MIDI in of your B unit. Here, it's important to note that if you are on an Axe 3, you need to use the MIDI out jack and not the MIDI through on the A unit. The MIDI through passes MIDI information that, as it says, is actually going through the Axe 3 from an upstream MIDI unit in the signal path. What we want to do is actually pass to the B unit the commands that are being generated by the A unit itself. So we'll use the out jack. In this use case, as long as you don't have any other MIDI units in your rig, it's not really important what MIDI channel you choose for the main unit since you're not sending anything to it. You only need to decide on a channel for the backup. In this case, we're just going to stick with MIDI channel 1. In the setup/MIDI remote menu of our main unit, we want to make sure that Send MIDI PC is set to on. This is set to off by default, and by turning it on, we're telling the main unit to send out a PC or program change to the backup unit when it changes presets, so that the backup will also change to that same preset. So when you go from, for example, preset 0000 to 0001, the main unit sends out a PC command of 1, and the backup unit changes to preset 1 as well. To have that backup unit change scenes in lockstep with the main though, we're going to turn to the MIDI block in the Axe 3, the FM9, and the FM3. And once we set up this MIDI block, you can just copy it into every preset that you use during your show. Now, the MIDI block can be placed anywhere in your preset. It doesn't need to be connected to your signal chain, and it can send up to 8 PC or CC values per scene. Changing to a scene automatically triggers the MIDI block to send out the selected values. So if you have other gear in your rig aside from your backup Fractal unit, you can also control them via the same main Fractal unit if they accept MIDI. There are many smaller bands who don't tour with, for example, a dedicated LD or lighting director, and they use this feature to trigger different lighting for different sections of songs. But in this case, we just want to control our backup unit and its scene changes. So we're going to be using one CC value per scene. We want the backup unit to change scenes in lockstep with the main unit. So again, make sure your B unit has a scene selection CC value assigned in its MIDI menu. In this case, we've already used 34, and we're just going to need to tell the main unit's MIDI block to now send out the correct number on CC34 for each scene. So in scene 1, our MIDI block will, on channel 1, via CC number 34, send out a value of 0. Now you might be saying, we're trying to select scene number 1, why are we sending 0? In MIDI speak, 0 is the first number. So our 8 scenes in a Fractal unit preset are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So again, for scene 1, we want channel 1, CC number 34, and a value of 0 for scene 1. For scene 2, again, we'll select channel 1, CC 34, and a value of 1. Scene 3, channel 1, CC 34, value 2, and so on. So now let's say I hit scene number 3 on my FC12. The main unit switches to scene number 3, and at the same time, the MIDI block instantly sends out CC command 34 value 2, and the backup unit follows along to scene 3. On the VP4, the process is similar, and it might even be simpler. Just use the scene MIDI menu to command your backup to switch to the same scene that your main unit is on. So for scene 1, message 34 on channel 1, value 0. For scene 2, message 34 on channel 1, value 1, and so on. Now, for the vast majority of backup scenarios, having the backup unit be on the same preset and the same scene when you switch to it is probably going to be enough. But if you also want to have the backup unit follow when you switch effects on and off, for example, we can turn to control switches. The Aspx 3, the FM9, and the FM3 all feature 6 control switches that can send out MIDI commands, both PC and again CC values, and they can be set to act either as momentary or latching switches. Those control switches can then be mapped to physical foot switches. So again, in this case, since there's no playback upstream, it's not important that you assign those CC numbers in the MIDI setup menu of your A unit. It's not listening for playback here, it is the playback effectively. So just like in our playback example, let's have the B unit follow along with the bypass states of delay 1 and drive 1 on CC numbers 47 and 49 respectively. As a side note, I haven't picked these numbers arbitrarily just because I've worked with Fractal units for a very long time. I still use the CC numbers that were actually hard-coded into the Aspx 2. The Aspx 3 ships with no CC values assigned, so you can pick your own. You could use whatever CC values you want. So if you're just controlling drive and delay bypass, for example, you could just use CC number 1 and 2. It doesn't matter. But in this case, I'm using 47 and 49. All we need to do now is first open the FC editor and the control switch MIDI menu. We'll assign control switch 1 to channel 1, CC value 47, off 0, on 127. And control switch 2 to channel 1, CC value 49, off 0, on 127. Then we'll go to our delay 1 block, right-click on the bypass parameter, and set the modifier source to control switch 1. We also want to make sure to invert the values here for the minimum and maximum of this modifier. When the control switch is off or at its minimum, we want it to bypass the effect, and when it's on or at its maximum, we want the effect obviously to be engaged. In our drive, we'll do the same thing, but select control switch 2. And now on our FC layout, we'll set one foot switch to actuate control switch 1. We'll set a custom name, in this case, delay. And we'll set another foot switch to actuate control switch 2. And set a custom name for this one as well, drive. And now pressing these foot switches turns those effects on and off in both the main and the backup units. I should note though, now that the bypass states of those effects are tied to control switches, you'll need to either use the physical foot switch or the control switch matrix to set and save on or off states for these effects across your scenes. One of the nice features of the matrix is that you can select last instead of just on or off, effectively giving these effects the same behavior as physical pedals, staying either on or off across scene changes depending on what you've stomped on. So whether you're on playback or you're using a foot controller or a combination of both, I hope you've seen that it's very straightforward to get a backup unit to follow along with a main unit as you switch through the show, so that in the exceedingly rare event that you do need to switch to the backup, it's right there where you want it to be. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please do make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to G66's channel, and leave me a comment in the comment section below, letting me know what you would like to see on a future episode of Fractal Friday. We will probably soon here have to get a little tone tour action going with these guys when they are finished. They are absolute powerhouse rigs. They do just about everything other than backflip, but I think Benson Boone has got that part of the show on lock. And as always, if you guys want to get the absolute most out of your Fractal Audio Systems unit, whether that is the Axfx 3, the FM9, or the FM3, make sure to visit classes.coopercarter.com for my complete Fractal Audio Masterclass series. For all things Fractal Audio, keep it right here on G66, and I will see you very soon on Fractal Friday.